Welcome to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County's Curator's Corner. My name is Thorin Tritter. I'm the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. This online program, as you may know, is part of a weekly series that we launched as a way to share information about objects and images in our collection at a time when our building was closed because of the coronavirus crisis. I'm happy to say that our building has reopened, although we strongly urge people to schedule their visits to our building in advance so that we can assure and maintain appropriate spacing in our galleries. But even though our building is reopened, I'm continuing to offer these online programs because of continuing concerns about corona in our galleries and around us. Before I start with today's talk, as always, let me encourage you, if you have questions while I'm talking, please type them into the Q&A window, which you should be able to find by scrolling your mouse around the bottom of the top of the screen. Type in your question and I will be sure to respond either while I'm giving my presentation or at the end of the talk. Okay, so today I would like to talk about an image that we have in our display in our second gallery, which shows one of the book burning events held by the Nazis in May of 1933. Here you can see a view of our gallery, and there is the photo of the book burning that I want to talk about. This gives you a better view, a zoomed in view, just on this one image. And here is our caption. University students and members of the SA throw un-German books on a bonfire in Hamburg, May 1933. The Nazis actively suppressed all opposing ideologies. Many of you may be familiar with the more well-known book burning event that was held in Berlin on May 10th, 1933, that drew a crowd of some 70,000 and included a speech by Joseph Goebbels, the Reich Minister of Propaganda. That event was even captured on film. You can see here. There were actually book burnings arranged in 34 university towns across Germany for May 10th of 1933. The largest was held in the capital city of Berlin, but as you saw in my caption, the photograph we show comes from an event in Hamburg. You'll recall that the Nazis had risen to power in the national elections in the summer and fall of 1932, gaining the largest share of any party's representation in the Reichstag, the German parliament, in July of 1932 and again in November of that year. In response to those electoral victories, the German president Paul von Hindenburg named Adolf Hitler as the nation's chancellor on January 30th, 1933, a date that is often used as the starting point for Nazi rule. Once in power, the Nazis redesigned the state around superiority of Germany and superiority of Germans and suppressed all dissent. As part of this effort, the Ministry of Propaganda Enlightenment, which was established in March of 1933 under Joseph Goebbels, set up various organizations to control specific aspects of German culture, including art, literature, theater, music, and film. All forms of entertainment and the dissemination of information fell under this ministry's control. But the book burning events of May of 1933 were not actually organized by Goebbels or the Ministry of Propaganda or any other part of the Nazi state. Instead, the book burnings were organized by the German Student Union and the National Socialist German Student Union, two national student organizations that have been somewhat fringe organizations, but who were elevated to the spotlight with the success of the Nazi Party. But importantly, and here's my point, it was students, not the German government, not the Nazi government, that organized the book burnings and provides an example, I think, of the grassroots support that Hitler and the Nazis had in Germany. We'd like to believe, I think, that the Nazis forced themselves upon Germany gaining power through intimidation and by hiding their intentions. But the grassroots planning of the students in May of 1933 hints at the wave of popular support that the Nazis were able to rely on. Pro-Nazi students were propelled to the forefront of German university politics a month before the book burnings, on April 7, 1933, because of the passage of the Law for the Restoration of the Professional Civil Service, which mandated the firing of non-Aryan faculty members at universities and other civil service positions. With the new law, pro-Nazi students and student groups started meeting with university faculty members and administrators to draw up lists of Jewish professors who had to be fired. Pro-Nazi students and student groups also interrupted lectures and physically intimidated Jewish students and faculty members, often wearing the brown shirt uniform of the stormtroopers, the SA. I'll talk more about them in a moment. You may think that book burning and the aggressive behavior seen by these students in 1933 doesn't fit with our image of what college students should be like. But we know even from American history that college students are often on the vanguard of political protests. And the German college students in the 1930s had come of age at a particular moment in time that made them more likely to endorse the ideas of Adolf Hitler than others in Germany. Historians refer to this group as the war youth generation. They'd grown up in the wake of World War I, surrounded by the shame of the defeat at World War I, with family members who had been killed or injured or maimed during the war, and wanting to recover the imagined glory of German history. They were eager to believe the stories about Germany being stabbed in the back by communists and Jews as a way to explain their defeat in World War I. Think about the timing. A child who was 6 or 7 years old at the end of World War I was 20 or 21 in 1932. It was this generation that was in college when Hitler came to power, and they were some of the Nazis' most ardent supporters. I said that our photograph is from the book burning in Hamburg. It was originally planned for May 10th of 1933, along with the event in Berlin and the other cities. However, heavy rain postponed the event, so that in Hamburg, the book burning was actually held on May 15th, 1933. It was not as large as the event in Berlin, and actually the low turnout led to a follow-up event in Hamburg, a second book burning that took place on May 30th, and then there was even a third as part of the summer solstice celebrations on June 24th of that year in Hamburg. But on May 15th, reports describe a crowd of perhaps as many as 12,000 people gathering in Hamburg at the book burning, including about 2,000 boys from the Hitler Youth. They gathered on the edge of one of the city's canals in front of one of the city's major gymnasiums or high schools, the Kaiser Friedrich Ufer. The Hamburg Tagblatt, a pro-Nazi daily newspaper, described the scene. Here's the translation of that one article. Crowds of people stood in a wide arc around the pyre that the Hamburg student body had piled up. They all wanted to witness the burning of those writings that had poisoned our people for decades. At around 11 p.m., the flame crackled up. Book after book from that un-German sphere was torn up and destroyed. The students organizing the national event in 1933 had laid out 12 theses to mimic Martin Luther's 95 Theses against the Catholic Church from 1517 that explained the reasons for the book burning. They celebrated in these 12 theses German language and literature, but claimed it needed to be purified, much like the nation. They then identified Jews as their main adversary, saying that Jews could not write in German. They also added a critique of any opposition, saying the German who writes in German but thinks un-German is a traitor. The student who speaks and writes non-German is also thoughtless and unfaithful to his task. And they finished their theses with the claim that we demand, they said, from the German students the will and the ability to overcome Jewish intellectualism and the associated liberal decline in German intellectual life. Among the authors whose books were burned that night were well-known socialists such as Bertolt Brecht and August Bebel, the founder of communism, or at least the concept of communism, Karl Marx, but also works of the Nobel Prize-winning German author Thomas Mann, whose support of the Weimar Republic and critiques of fascism raised Nazi ire. Also, books by Erich Maria Remarque, whose All Quiet on the Western Front, with its direct and unflinching description of World War I, was seen as a literary betrayal, according to some, of the soldiers of World War I. There were also works by German literary critics of the Nazi regime that were burned, such as those of Erich Kästner, Heinrich Mann, and Ernst Glasser. There were even American authors like Jack London, Theodore Dreiser, and Helen Keller, who had championed pacifism and targeted a critique of the unfairness that they saw around them, and that drew attention. There were some Jewish authors included in the burning. Perhaps the most famous contemporary German Jewish authors of the day were Franz Werfel, Max Brod, and Stefan Zweig. Another target was the 19th century German Jewish writer Heinrich Heine, who had written in 1821 in a play called Al-Mansur the line, "Where they burn books, they will ultimately burn people as well." In that play, a Muslim man says that line after hearing that Christians had burned copies of the Quran. Today, it's more well known for the horrific irony of his own books being burned in the prelude to what would become the Holocaust. I want to go back to look more closely at a few things in our photograph. The fire itself draws our eye in the picture, where the burned remains of the books are difficult to differentiate from the fuel and wood that's been used to start the fire. But I think our eye is also drawn to the two blurry figures in the center of the image, caught as they throw books onto the fire. Given the low light and the speed of the film used, their movement blurred the image, but still captures their actions as compared to the much more passive viewers who stand around the fire. But it is also those passive viewers in the background that I wanted to spend a moment more on. Most, I think you'll see, appear in uniforms, wearing the brown shirts of the SA, short for the Sturmabteilung, meaning the storm detachment, or often referred to as the stormtroopers. This is another photograph of the same book burning in Hamburg without any of the blurry figures, which again shows these SA uniforms more clearly all around the fire. The SA had been formed as the paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party in 1921. Its primary purpose was to provide protection for Nazi rallies and assemblies, also to disrupt the meetings of opposing parties, and finally to physically fight against the paramilitary units of other parties like the Communist Party, the KPD, or the Social Democratic Party, the SPD. In the 1920s, it particularly appealed, the stormtroopers particularly appealed to ex-soldiers from World War I and unemployed men, giving them an opportunity to wear a uniform, to gain some pride from that, and to get into some brawls. By 1930, the SA had grown to some 60,000 members. But with the stock market crash of 1929 and the political divisions that followed, it grew rapidly, reaching 77,000 members by 1931 in January. By November of 1931, it was over 200,000 members. And by August of 1932, almost 500,000. When Hitler was named chancellor in January of 1933, SA membership had increased to close to 2 million. And within another year, membership doubled again to nearly 4 million. That was 40 times as large as the number of troops and officers in the German army. 40 times. Our picture captures that moment in time when Germans were rallying to the Nazi stormtroopers in numbers never seen before. No longer limited in 1933 to ex-soldiers and the unemployed, college students, faculty members, and men all throughout Germany saw joining the SA as a way to show their support for the Nazi Party, and perhaps also as a way to open doors or to make connections, a way to help them get ahead in the future. What I wanted to emphasize, however, is that in 1933, the SA were not officials of the German state. They worked for the Nazi Party. They felt empowered by the success of the party to enforce the new laws being passed by the Nazi-controlled government, like in helping to enforce the national boycott of Jewish businesses that was imposed on April 1st of 1933. But they were not official state actors like the police or the army. But what we saw in the following months after May of 1933 is a blurring in Germany between what was the government and what was the party. And by the summer of 1933, the line was blurred to the point of non-existence. The Nazi Party became the German state. The party and the state merged, or perhaps another way, or a more accurate way of saying it is the state was subsumed by the Nazi Party. The Nazis convinced Germans that the best interest of the Nazi Party was the same as the best interest of the German state. Key to that process was a banning of dissent. It started with cracking down on those the Nazis claimed were dangerous or a threat to the nation, particularly in the wake of the Reichstag fire of February 27th of 1933. But the book burning represents another strand in that effort. And as we can see in the photo, the SA, with their affiliation with the Nazi Party clearly visible to all, embraced the idea that since the party was working for the best interests of the nation, any criticism of the party was an attack against the nation. Any books that could inspire criticism of the party or the nation raised ideas that ran counter to Nazi ideology had to be purged. In July of 1933, the Nazis were able to pass a law banning the existence of any other political party. The state and the party became one. I know I've gotten a bit off topic. Let me finish by talking about the American reaction to the book burning of May 1933. American newspapers around the country were quick to report and condemn the books burned in Germany, in Hamburg and in Berlin. On May 10th, the same day as most of the book burnings in Germany, the New York Times ran a story about them on the front page above the fold. You can see on the right-hand side a slightly zoomed-in version, but you can see this is major news to get on the front page of the New York Times. Oops. The Times also ran a follow-up story the next day, also on the front page above the fold. There was also an editorial in the New York Times on May 11th, particularly about the book burnings, that described the event as a literary holocaust. An interesting wording and suggested the language that we would come to use for later events. But it was not only the New York Times that covered the book burnings. This was a major story across the country. So in Bowling Green, Kentucky, the Park City Daily News included a story about it on their front page on May 10th. In Wisconsin, the story broke the following day on the 11th. And in Casper, Wyoming, it took until the 23rd, although that coverage included a photograph of the book burning from Berlin. Other newspapers were also quick to use the book burnings as fodder for political cartoons, like this one from an Ohio newspaper suggesting the burnt books were an offering specifically to Hitler. Or these two from the New York area, one from the Brooklyn Eagle and the other from the Yiddish language Daily Forward. The newly established Newsweek magazine saw the book burning as significant enough to merit inclusion on the center of its cover from the May 27th edition. So Americans were well aware of the events in Germany in May of 1933 and read with interest about how things were going and how things were changing in Germany under the leadership of the new chancellor. But without doubt, most Americans remained much more focused on domestic concerns, including the actions of America's new president, FDR, who was sworn in March of 1933, and questioning what he would do to alleviate the conditions brought on by the Depression in America. And as we know, those domestic concerns continued to dominate American thinking, regardless of how things evolved in Germany, really all the way until Pearl Harbor, 8 years later, when America finally entered the war against Germany. Let me finish by mentioning two memorials that were put up to remind people of the book burnings in May of 1933. In Hamburg, a memorial was put up in 1985 on the site where the bonfire was held. The memorial consists of a brick wall in a semicircle around an elevated lawn. Attached to that brick wall, as you can see here, are several plaques, red marble plaques. The first includes the quote from Heinrich Heine that I mentioned earlier. A second and third explain the history of what happened in Hamburg and list some of the books that were burned. And then the last panel finally warns the reader with the quote or with the line, "So that books, cities, and people are never burned again, never more fascism, never again war." Every May 15th, on the anniversary of the book burning in Hamburg, the memorial is the site of a public reading where people can come up and read from some of the books that were burned in the bonfire that took place there. The other memorial I wanted to mention is the one in Berlin on the site of the largest book burning event in Germany. Designed by the Israeli artist Micha Ullman, the memorial seeks to emphasize what was lost and the absence that remains because of the deeds of the Nazis. Rather than building a memorial that rises above the ground, his memorial, or some refer to it as a counter memorial, is constructed below ground. So from a distance, nothing is visible. And here's a photo of the square where this memorial stands, although there's nothing to see from a distance. As one approaches, there are two metal plaques that are marking the site. One repeats the quote from Heinrich Heine. The other says, "In the middle of this square on May 10th, 1933, National Socialist students burned the works of hundreds of freelance writers, journalists, philosophers, and scientists." The actual memorial, however, is only visible through a window on the ground where viewers look into a subterranean vault to find empty bookcases. And I hope you can get a sense of it from this image. Those empty bookcases stand as a reminder of what was lost, or as some have referred to it as the presence of absence. For me, it's one of the most interesting and powerful memorials because of that effort to try and capture the absence, capture what's missing. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I hope you found this an interesting exploration into the picture and some of the context for it in our gallery. If you have questions, I know some have already posted them, but please keep typing them in and I'll look at them in a moment. Let me also, as always, remind you of our current temporary exhibition and some of our upcoming programs. First, I should highlight that we have reopened our galleries, although we strongly encourage you to contact us in advance if you're going to come so we can reserve a ticket for you. And you might want to come and see our new exhibition, The Holocaust Through the Eyes of a Survivor's Daughter, Sculptures by Tamima, which includes 30 sculptures by the acclaimed Nassau County artist who processes both her mother's experience during the Holocaust and her own experience as a child of a survivor through her art. In terms of programming, our planned program tomorrow night with some of the deli guys who were in the documentary Deli Man has been postponed due to the weather and the difficulty of delivering deli food to people during the storm. So we'll send out more information about when it's going to be rescheduled. My next Curator's Corner is going to be next year on January 6th at noon, when I'm going to talk about a wall clock in our collection that offers a window into pre-war Paris. One other thing I wanted to mention is that HMTC is going to be offering an 8-session course beginning in late January to help the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors craft a written presentation that preserves their family history. My colleague Helen Turner and I will be leading the class, although we've also lined up a number of guest speakers. If you're interested in learning more about this course or about any of our upcoming programs, please go to our website, www.hmtcli.org, and click on the Events tab. And please also go to our website and click on the Give Now button to make a donation to support programs like this. Okay, let me take a look at some of your questions. I think there's quite a few that have come in. Somebody is talking about college campuses today where there's boycotts of Israel or other acts, hateful acts, anti-Semitism on college campuses. Is this similar to the aggressions that were seen back then? I think it's on a different scale than what we saw back then, and perhaps most important, the difference is the government, that our government is not supporting these acts, whereas the government in Nazi Germany was. How were the students able to coordinate the events in 1933 all over Germany? It seems like it would be much easier now with the internet, but how were they able to get information disseminated back then? And as Debbie says, through newspapers, that was certainly one way, student newspapers. There were also, I think, coordinating groups of of German students, and they would be writing to each other with letters and planning or meeting, and then disseminating the information. But newspapers, I think, were a main way of getting the information. Were there any responses by any German people or journalists to the book burnings? I'm assuming that, Anita, here you're talking about criticisms of the book burnings. And there certainly were, in America, there were a number of authors were loud critics of it. In Germany, much fewer, mostly because of the intimidation, I think, and because of the really strong support the Nazis had. They had 40% of the vote, I think it is, in November of 1932. So, almost half of the country had voted for them, and the number was even higher in the subsequent election. So almost half of the country was voting for them, and the others, I think, mostly stayed quiet. And as Anita, I know you know, our museum focuses very much on that silent group, the bystanders, and the need for us not to be bystanders today. The other thing, obviously, about the opposition to the book burnings, much of it had already been suppressed after the Reichstag fire, when the Nazis had closed down printing presses of newspapers that were criticizing the government, had cracked down on political parties that were opposing. So there was a great deal of repression that prevented any opposition from really having a center where it could be voiced. Let me see, I think there's two other things here. Did people manage to keep any books safe that the Nazis wanted to destroy? Greta Krause asked this, and absolutely, people did, and there were efforts to hide some of the books. Maybe that's a better example of people who were responding to the book burnings as a critique. One way they were able to resist was by hiding those books. So certainly that did happen. Okay, thanks very much for listening today and for tuning in. I hope you all stay safe and warm during the impending storm, and I look forward to seeing you again at some of our other upcoming programs. Have a wonderful day. Take care.